Hello and welcome to the Open Era podcast. My name is Devang and Simon. Me and Simon are off this week, but we're going to look back at the Australian Open last year when Aryna Sabalenka really announced her status as one of the players, if not the player to beat on the women's tour, with the 2024 season coming to an end and Sabalenka and Swiatek neck and neck for number one in the WTA. We thought it would be wise to look back at the moment that Aryna Sabalenka maybe really did assert herself as one of the top players in the game. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you soon.
Hello and welcome to the Open Air Podcast. My name is Devang and Simon. I'm joined, as always, by Mr. Simon Bush, the European traveling man. We missed you last week. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing all right, thank you. I'm on the precipice of being back in Canada, so I'm looking forward to that. And going from some lovely weather to some not very nice weather. How are things over in Toronto at the moment? What do I have to look forward to?
Literally, it's a blizzard today. So I was going to sugarcoat things and be like, the days are getting longer and the sun is setting later and we're just around the corner from spring. But today was a jolt of reality that you're coming back, Simon, into the suck. So enjoy it while you can.
Wonderful. Leaves us on a perfect transition to talk about some glorious weather down under and seeing the end of another Grand Slam, Dev.
We did. And I'm fascinated because I didn't get a chance to talk to you last week on the pod, Bush. I talked to you offline and through chat and text, whatever. But I didn't get a chance to talk to you last week. And I have to say, I was feeling a lot better about this tournament last week than I am today. And I don't know if it's a combination of multiple things, which we can get into about why maybe this tournament didn't hit as much for me. But I thought the second week was quite poor. And outside from the women's final, this was arguably the worst slam I had observed in at least a few years.
Are we laying this entirely at the feet of Breakpoint? Is it all Breakpoint's fault?
No, but I wonder if this has something to do with the fact that last year was so emotional and there was a void created, and for a certain fan, and maybe I'm part of that, it was going to take longer to deal with the changes. And perhaps I am still affected more than I let on. But I didn't think the tennis was that good. And I'm wondering if you feel similar and if you're less jaded by time passing than I am.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. And I think that's where I ended up as well, which is that we kind of got some duds in both the semi-final and of the men's and women's. I actually think that if we look across the board, and we'll come onto it in the second segment, is there was a fair amount of interesting winners in this tournament, but perhaps the road to get there wasn't the most exciting, which I think most people will probably remember this tournament for the breakthrough of Aryna Sabalenka and winning her first Grand Slam after being the bridesmaid so many damn times. But yeah, it was a bit of a damn squib across the board, and this is not a tournament I'm going to remember for a long time.
Yeah, and I don't want to take anything away from Sabalenka, who we're going to talk about in a few seconds, but I do think the aura of this tournament faded a bit for me, and I hope it returns. And I wonder if this is just a thing as part of being a sports fan and having your interests change over time. But that's what I'm left feeling after watching the men's final on Sunday, watching Novak Djokovic win yet again in Melbourne, truly his favorite place in the world outside of Belgrade. But what a record he has there. We'll talk about him in a bit. But let's start with Sabalenka, Bush. I mentioned last year, and I mentioned the emotional heaviness of it all. And amongst all the retirements and the injuries, we also had a couple countries effectively banned from being represented at all at the majors. And that led into 2023, and we had various scenes of idiocy and debauchery in Melbourne regarding pro-Russian protests and Vladimir Putin on flags, etc. But remove all that garbage aside, I thought the final was incredible. I thought the two people involved in the final deserve endless endless praise and also thousands of words written about them. But just off the top, Simon, we both picked Sabalenka to win this tournament, which I do feel like was the common pick. And I think what's the most shocking part of this all to me is that we were all right. We all assumed that she had put it all together. But to watch someone actually do that successfully was a hell of a feeling. And I think that's what I love the most about that final between Rybakina and Sabalenka Bush. It was seeing someone confront her demons, confront her past issues, and put them to bed on the biggest stage.
It's true. And I think people who will find some doubt in this title, and I think that's ridiculous, by the way, just given the final that we had, and it was an incredibly high quality of final, will look at her road to this championship match and think that it was somewhat a little soft. But sometimes you need to overcome soft draws in order to win championships and to get across the line. I think if she's 24 years of age, she is rising up to world number 2. With that performance in the final that she had, and just given the jitters that we've seen from her at latter stages of tournament, she looked like someone who desperately wanted to win this title, and she did not crumble under pressure, which I think is a hugely telling fact of someone who has grown in stature, certainly since the back end of last year, when I think a lot of us during the course of that season had not necessarily begun to write her off, but almost had sort of suspected that we may have seen the best of her. And I think we're rewriting that script now because there's much, much more to come from her.
And even if you want to maybe disparage the second week of opponents and be like they weren't the top caliber, that first week was hellacious. Like Shelby Rogers, Elise Mertens, Belinda Bencic handled them all in straight sets. So I think she was full value for the win. And Bush, I think the other angle of this that I find really interesting is listening to Sabalenka talk about her struggles herself and acknowledge that she kind of parted ways with her psychologist, her sports psychologist, realizing that basically it was up to her at this point, which I'm curious how you view that. But there was a Globe and Mail tweet after she won in which it said, Aryna Sabalenka defeats Aryna Sabalenka to win the Australian Open. And though that was a typo, it felt really right. It did feel very apt because this was as much between the years as anything else, because we've seen the talent, we've seen the ability. I remember I mentioned on the show a few times watching her against Coco Gauff last year in Toronto and just wondering what would it take to put that final piece together. And perhaps it took eschewing all the professional advice available to her and doing it her own way.
And I think the between the ears part is an interesting one to examine and to unpack for a second here, because when so often we look at how someone overcomes the sort of mental block that they've had, it's so often about like holding nerve in key crunch points. And I think she did that. I think certainly to serve out a Grand Slam, given the serving jitters that we've seen from her during her career, is one thing. And that's one thing that I think is extremely impressive to see. I think one of the things that is going to get lost in all of this, because everyone's going to circle the numbers, right? They're going to say 51 winners, 28 unforced errors. Like she went for it and, she hit all these things and, amazing. She did not look like she was going to win this match for a set in 3 games, a set in 4 games. And I think the biggest testament I can say for this final is that she worked it out tactically. I think she was able to problem solve on the court. And I think she was able to discover what her opponent was doing to her and attacking her weaknesses and work around them. And then at that point, she was able to start smacking winners. And it was just a joy to watch at that point.
Well, both players hit the absolute piss out of the ball, which I found utterly wonderful to observe, and just terrific stuff. B, if it wasn't it the exact opposite situation than the 2022 US Open semifinal against Iga Bush for Sabalenka? Because in that match, she looked like the person who was going to win at several points. But it was that idea of maintaining calm and not rushing things and having that belief in yourself, which she didn't really have then, and she didn't have in Toronto either. And we lament how short the offseason has been in tennis, but I find it remarkable that something was able to change for her in this span of time, Simon, whether it be a few weeks or a few months, because we looked at someone who maintains all of the sound-breaking shot quality and absolute power, but the serve was a huge factor and mentality was a massive factor. And I saw this said a few times, and off the back of Breakpoint and getting a glimpse into what Maria Sakkari is dealing with on the mental side and her work with her sports psychologist / coach, and wondering, can this happen for her too? Because I think I like to watch good tennis, Simon. I love to watch good tennis, but I also love to see people achieve their goals and see them achieve their goals after facing considerable hurdles along the way. So as much as I was happy for Sabalenka here, I was thinking about Sakkari as well.
Yeah, I agree. It's interesting that you bring Maria Sakkari into this, because it does show if you're going to get to the back end of tournaments and you keep plugging away, you eventually might find a way to open that door. And I wonder what this win does for some of the players who have been in a similar position to Aryna Sabalenka, to see someone who has fallen at the final hurdle and had so many doubts, not just with the game, but obviously mentally as well, whether she was able to overcome that. I wonder whether it does give a lift to the rest of the tour who have been in that position. And I think we saw it as well, didn't we, with the outpouring of support. This was a very popular win, just given the kind of support that she got on social media from a very wide swath of players. Like, this was not just sort of her people from her native country who were reaching out and to support her. It was, the entirety of the top 50 that seemed like they wanted to show support to a first-time champion like this. And I think that must have something to do with the fact that she has been so close. And it's crushing. It has to be absolutely crushing to lose the way that she has lost in some of these biggest moments, and then to finally get the monkey off the back in the way that she has done.
Awesome stuff. I want to spend some time talking about Rybakina Bush, the Wimbledon champion last year. Once again, not giving a lot of respect and credit for that. And I love basically the FU tour that she waged in Melbourne this year, employing some absolutely amazing tennis along the way, especially against Ostapenko and Azarenka to make the final. I'm curious, Bush, if you saw Pam Shriver have some pretty choice words for her coach in the stands, and the way his body language was, and maybe the tone and the way he was coaching Rybakina seemed aggressive, quote unquote. And I saw Dmitry Tursunov push back on that, who's coached quite a few players on the WTA as well. But I saw Pog say this on the Discord and on Twitter, and that this had some like weird coded Soviet Union vibes about how we know how to treat our athletes better, and this is abuse, and this is not right, and this is the wrong way to coach someone. It's a bit upsetting to me that we're still basically covering Rybakina and Sabalenka to an extent as if they are others because of this aspect, and also the fact that they can't have their flags beside their names. Like, this reminded me of just more othering when it wasn't necessary.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting, right? Like, we're touching on the tennis, and I think that's a good place, especially given who the first-time champion was here. And we can touch on some of the geopolitical aspects of this win as well in and maybe another segment or another time down the road. But it is interesting, of course, your two finalists, different ends of the, or at least certainly having elements of, problematic is way too strong of a word, but certainly like interesting elements to how they arrived at this final and what it means just from a political statement, given the country flag that's next to their name. I thought your joke was quite funny, actually. Getting over the winning line only to see the white flags appear. Yes, very good. So on the Rybakina stuff, I must admit, like, seeing that exchange and seeing Dmitry Tursunov and seeing Pam Shriver sort of fairly heated and fairly back and forth in terms of the discussion on this one, this kind of felt a little bit to me like I have no fucking idea what's going on here.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if this is, I don't know what their relationship is like.
I've got no idea. It seemed very strange to me. And I mean, on the surface, you could read it and think like this person is, in the case of Shriver, is wading into a situation where she's just reading off a screen or looking at information and reading her own interpretation into it. But even that, I've got no idea if that's true or not. So I don't actually know if I'm in a position really to comment on this one, because it all just felt a bit weird, is how I would look at this one.
Yeah, and everyone's coming into this conversation with their priors, right? Like having their belief kind of sewn in already. I saw Rybakina's statement afterwards in which he said, disregard the fake news, etc. Anytime someone uses fake news now in a release or a comment, I immediately shudder and want to collapse to the ground.
And I think I had not seen that Darren Cahill clip before.
Jesus
that had been
Christ.
Around in terms
Calling
of how
Simona Halep a disgrace on the court. Pre-drug ban, by the way. Pre-drug ban. This was not afterwards.
And I think it stands... I can't ever imagine myself or like any sort of institution that I've been around, even inside of tennis, to be that level of disrespectful to a player in terms of how you were talking to them. And I think that's kind of fascinating to see the inside of that camp and how it operated. Like there's motivation and there's being like, you know, borderline bullying as well. And I thought that was just a curious one to understand from where that came from. So watch this space on this story. I feel like this might be an avalanche of things that come afterwards.
The other aspect of this, and I go back to Zachary, is like, I think the way she's formed her coaching staff around her is that she does not need the tough love. I think she needs the support and the...
No one does, Dev. I mean, that's the unfortunate part of it is literally no one does.
But I mean, Rebecca, an example of someone who might.
We're getting deep into the realms of psychology, aren't we?
Yeah, and once again, we do not know. But I would say that it seems to work. Seems to be working here in some regard. And in this cold world of calculating results, I wonder if the player is down with that as well, even though perhaps in the moment it is upsetting and terrible.
So touching on Rybakina's performance in this final as well, removed from everything else, I think she's going to watch this tape back and watch this final back and think, how did I lose this one from the position that I was in? Because I thought she was playing incredibly well. I thought she'd game planned, her and her coach had game planned very, very well to try and neutralize some of the things that Sabalenka did. And I think that is testament to them as a team being able to actually produce that kind of game plan and stick to it. But being said, like that, all that being said, this is a really, really good final. And I don't really want that to get lost in everything else and all the discussion about it, because this was two players who had contrasting styles in terms of what they were trying to achieve on the court. Not necessarily games-wise. Like I think they match up fairly well in terms of the kind of games they play. But in the sense that Rybakina was trying to go for the errors, was trying to be high percentage in terms of the tennis that she was playing, use the serve really well, and try and really like hurt Sabalenka and neutralize some of the game. And Sabalenka was just having none of it. Like, I'm here, and I will stamp my footprint all over this final. And I think that fight-wise and style-wise made for a really, really interesting matchup.
100%. Sabalenka now up to 2 in the rankings. Rybakina now top 10. I believe that's a career high for her, which seems outrageous as well.
She's only 23, Dev. Like, that's the thing.
Yeah.
Everyone seems to think she's like this journey woman who's like 29 years of age and is just coming into her own. Like she's going to be around at the top end of the game for a long time as well.
I saw something from the tennis prof in front of the show after the final, and he was talking about what this meant for Iga Swiatek going forward. Iga losing quite early in this tournament to Rybakina, which I think, as we all came to see, was a sign of things to come. But he was saying that this level of power displayed in the final might be a problem for Iga, but will it? Because I think on the forehand wing, Iga's still definitely up there, and the movement is still tops amongst these three. But do you think this says anything about the immediate future of the tour? Like, this does still seem like Iga will eventually triumph during the clay court season, but it might get interesting in Indian Wells and Miami.
Yeah, I think watch the space in the hard court. That's the really fascinating space, I think, for supremacy on the women's tour, because I think Iga Swiatek is going to own the clay season and is going to own the slow stuff. And by the slow stuff, I mean basically the US Open, is that those things are like sandpaper at this point.
Yeah.
I think she still has a bit to prove, does she not? Despite her getting to the semi-final last year, I'm talking about Swiatek here, the quick stuff is something that has eluded her in her career. She hasn't won a Grand Slam on a quick surface yet. She's got plenty of time. Plenty of time. I think Rybakina is she's such a tough matchup on this surface. The way that huge serve, like the serve is massive. It's very repeatable as well. And I think the funny thing is, to me, reading all the stuff about her and the perception that I think people have of her is that she's just this like big bombing serve, huge forehand, that kind of player. But she's got so much nous in her game as well. Like, to the point that I kind of think she's a little more conservative than people give her credit for. Like she's very consistent on both strokes and has a really good tennis brain out there. And this isn't just someone who is playing, ABC Surf Plus One style stuff on the court. So I'm genuinely excited to see the top end of this sport for the next year, because I really do believe that Iga's going to wipe the floor with the field on the clay courts. The rest of the year, though, what is going to happen at Wimbledon? Who knows?
Yeah. Finally, for me, Bush, do you think the celebration of Sabalenka was a bit muted because she's from Belarus and doesn't have a flag beside her name?
You mean the muted celebration from the Australian Open itself?
Yeah, and the wider, outside of I would say the tennis crazies that either listen to the show or talk about it all the time online.
I guess the question is in regards to some levity on this one, or poking some fun at it, is will the Belarusian prime minister use this as a sample of
Belarusian supremacy? Yeah, Lukashenko, for sure he will. For sure he will. I mean, yeah. And I think I saw some people trying to see if Sabalenka has come out and said things about the government at home, either pro or against. And I think once again, for the 9,000th time, I think there's a lot of other factors going on here, including the safety of the people she loves back home, etc. But yeah, I saw just a wild slew of terrible, terrible takes, including those from your right wingers, QAnon, deep state people who believe this is all part of the plan to make them embarrassed by showing a white flag beside her name as a champion. So,
but Dev, this is the literal example of what Wimbledon said they didn't want to have happen. In the sense of the reason they banned these athletes last year.
So they couldn't win? So
they couldn't win, and they couldn't be used as propaganda agents. Literally, this tournament has been won by a Belarusian. So,
yeah.
Well, I guess we'll have to wait and see what happens.
Wimbledon hasn't said anything yet, correct? Wimbledon has not said anything yet about what they're going to do this year.
Nope.
Interesting. All right. Yeah, I will say, you said this a bit earlier, Simon, and I think the tennis itself was exceptional and definitely deserves its praise and its lengthy write-ups, etc. And I hope we see that, but I did think it was a bit muted because of who won. And yeah, I'll leave it there.
I enjoyed this final a lot. It's one of the more enjoyable women's finals I've seen in a really long time. I'm happy for the winner. I'm happy for what she's overcome. And I'm really happy that Aryna Sabalenka is getting the love as well, because she's a really, really good player and deserved to be a little more heralded, given that she is a Grand Slam champion, albeit at an exhibition tournament last year.
Well said. It sets the table for a very exciting year to come on the WTA side, who once again, I think, kind of saved this tournament. But when we come back, we'll talk about the rest of the winners in Melbourne, another Australian men's duo taking the doubles crown, plus ho-hum number 22 for Novak Djokovic. Coming up next on Open Era.
Welcome back to the Open Era podcast. It's time to wrap up some of the other events that happened at Melbourne Park, some of the other winners that we saw throughout the past few days, Devang. And I wanted to kick this segment off with a special mention for an Indian icon, someone that I know you've praised on this show before, and someone that I think deserves a bit of love here, because Sania Mirza did not win, did not go out on top, but she did go out in a final. Her and her partner Rohan Bopara lost to Luisa Stefani and Rafael Matos in the mixed doubles final. Strange that we're opening the second segment with a mixed doubles final, but I wanted to give a moment just to talk about Sania Mirza, and someone who, if you want to talk about a trailblazer and someone that's going to leave a lasting impact on this sport, I can't think of many better than Sania Mirza.
Holy cow, no, for so many reasons. And I think a trailblazer is almost underselling her impact on this game. I think a couple of things: being a woman athlete in India, being a Muslim athlete in India, making herself known to the wider public and having her celebrated as a nation's daughter as well. With those two things, not the easiest thing in the world. So I think breaking those barriers was absolutely massive, and she was a hell of a player to boot, winning doubles at the Australian Open, Wimbledon, and US Open. She made the final at the French Open as well in 2011. I was desperately hoping that she was going to win this with Rohan Bopanna, who's also wildly heralded as just a genuinely great dude and who hangs out with Chapo a lot for our Canadian fans. But bittersweet, man. I think the Brazilians winning that final as well was awesome. I believe that's the first time a Brazilian duo has won the mixed doubles at a slam. So that's amazing for Luisa Stefani and Rafael Matos. But Bush, I desperately wanted Mirza and Bopanna to win this title, but it doesn't go that way sometimes. Her mark on this game in India goes beyond tennis. Like I said, I think there is a push amongst more people to see women's sportsmen in that country get more of a chance, whether it be on the cricket scene, in which I think you're seeing a push from external parties pushing the cricket board there to promote the women's game and get those games on TV more and have them be held to the same stature as the men. I think a lot of this can be drawn back to how important Sania Mirza was for Indian sports, because for a time she was the biggest and the greatest.
I couldn't say it any better myself. Talk about the challenge and the struggle of rising up through a deeply sexist society that Indian culture is. And this is not me speaking out of turn. I think you talk to anyone who grew up in that society, they would tell you the same thing. And yes, I know Canada and United Kingdom and United States have its own set of problems, but there's plenty of sexism to go around in plenty of countries. One thing to note on this one, 2003, 20 years she's been playing for. So to end this career in the final of a Grand Slam is pretty impressive. And I just wanted to circle the quote that she said on court, just when asked about how she had any sort of inspiration or advice. And her quote being, "Don't let anyone tell you that you can't do something, even if nobody else has done it before." Isn't that just the perfect quote to summarize what she's done in her career?
It's perfect. It's absolutely perfect. I hope she's given a chance to shape the future of the game, not just in India, but in Asia as well, and within the wider tennis world. She's a massive name in India as well. So I feel like she can do so many things, and I'm fascinated to see what she decides to next. And shouts to mixed doubles as well.
So let's shake the magic 8-ball. Let's dive into the grab bag and see what comes out next. Oh, wait a minute. Rinky. Didn't someone say that Rinky was going to be the last Australian standing in this tournament?
Yeah, you did. Oh my God. I wanted to come at you for the Rinky pick these last 2 weeks, but to see Rinks and Coobs.
Rinks and Coobs.
The most
good Australian boys.
Australian. But this in comparison to Special K or Cock Squared or what offensive drug combo.
K-holes.
The K-holes. This was like, these are the good guys from high school. The drama kids. The kids who befriended everyone and let everyone sit at their table. This was these guys winning as opposed to the jock jerks.
If the ATP Tour is listening at the moment, please get Rinky, Hichikata, and Jason Kubler into an improv session and record it and chuck it up on your social media. Let's not deny the fans this. We clearly know they're theatre kids. We clearly know how this goes.
Obviously. That final point. Did you catch the championship point?
I did.
Cow. Oh man. Just the doubles. Again, people have been on us for years, not covering doubles enough. And we're wrong. We're stupid, is what I'm saying.
So Hichikata quoted basically saying, "It's been ridiculous. I've never experienced anything like this," referring to the last 2 weeks. Coobs, my boy, I'm so glad you said yes to playing with me. I thought it was going in a different direction, that quote then. I'm so glad you said yes. Just what a lovely story this was, right? And against the backdrop, I don't think we hugely got into the spirit of the K-Holes run last year, even though I think it caused some excitement down under to see a home team win the way that they did. But I think we can celebrate this one because this was really damn cool to see.
Awesome. Jason Kubler, who had a nice run towards the end of last year at Wimbledon, but a bit of a journeyman himself. I think he's 29 now. So this is good, very good chances going down as a career highlight, and deservedly so, winning a slam in your own country with your countrymen who is still quite young. I think Rinky's 21. So that'll be cool to see him progress. I wonder, how do you view him as a singles player, Bush, in terms of those prospects? I think he made the second round this year in Australia, and he was bounced in the first round at the US Open last year.
Did he lose to Novak? Do you remember watching this match at some point?
Rafa, I think. Right?
Rafa, yeah. Rafa, I remember this. Yeah, and I think that's really the only time that I've seen him outside of watching him in doubles here is that, and you saw enough in the game as well, right? Not just simply from a weapon standpoint, but from a mental side of it as well. Like this dude looked like he had some real fight out on the court. And again, this is playing up to stereotypes, right? The Australian kid. He's got so much
fighter,
grit, so much fighting. Doesn't go away easily. Just so difficult to break down and beat. But those things count for a lot. I think he is a more than competent singles player. You can see certainly this guy's going to be a top 100 player at some point in his career, maybe even during the course of this year. And this double title is only going to help that in terms of his confidence.
Yet another college kid, UNC.
Absolutely.
Coming in waves. Love it. Absolutely fantastic.
Let's dive into the bag. Let's go and so the imaginary bag, I dip my hand into it, and what do I pull out? Oh, look, Dev, on this, Barbara Krejcikova and Katerina Siniakova won again. They've won another doubles title.
Ooh, the defending champs.
Unbelievable.
Shouts to Aoyama and Shibihara, the Japanese team, who took out Goff and Pegula in the semifinals, which I think was a bit of a stunner. So that was an incredible run for them. But Krejcikova, Siniakova, I don't know if you saw Barb with the headphones in during the women's singles final, which I thought was utterly fantastic. What was she listening to, Simon?
That's a really good question. What do you think Barbara Krejcikova listens to?
A podcast, probably. Probably a podcast not related to tennis at all. I bet you it was about...
She's listening to Up First, whatever it's called. Is that right? The New York Times one?
The Daily with that guy's incredibly distinct voice. I was going to say annoying, but they're utterly famous and killing it on the pod chart. So who am I to say that dude's voice is off-putting? The host of The Daily. Okay, I'll stop. But anyways, Krejcikova, Siniakova, back-to-back, Bush.
Not just back-to-back as well, is that you have the additional step of this is that they have not lost at Grand Slam level since the first round of the 2021 US Open. The only reason that they didn't complete the calendar slam last year is because Barb went and got COVID. Otherwise, I'm almost certain they would have won the French Open last year. And we touched on this, right? We touched on them as a pair of what they had left to achieve. Like, they've done everything. You've won everything. You've achieved everything. And Siniakova is now the world number one as well in double. So they can both tick that thing off the list of that final check mark. The thing that's left on the list is completing the calendar Grand Slam. Are they going to do it this year, Dev? Because I'd put some money on that happening.
Me too. And I think a part of that is that the dedication, the commitment to fitness, these two have got it. They will show up. They'll put in their time. You can check your watch. They'll show up. So I think that's a storyline that I'll be fascinated to follow this season as well.
We transition, as I dip into the bag again. There might be an ongoing theme just in the next three stories. If we mention the fact that Barbara Krejcikova and Katerina Siniakova are dominant in their respective field at Australia, the two wheelchair singles champions, both utterly dominant as well. Alfie Hewitt, absolutely value for yet another title. Dude is on fire. And of course, Didi de Groot as well on the women's side. Dude, like, I don't know what it is about Australia, but it just seems to inspire repeat champions over and over and over again. And maybe that gives some credence to your suggestion that this felt like a bit of a damp squib, simply because the same people won again.
Yeah, and both of those players won the doubles competition as well with their partners, which, I mean, when you're good, you're good. But there's something about, I watched Alfie's semi and his final, or at least highlights of it. And the guys he's playing, like, they're phenomenal. Like, they're really, really good at this. Like, it's not like they're playing people who showed up a couple weeks before and are giving this a go, which sometimes is what it feels like, right? Like when he's playing his partner, Gordon Reed, in the quarters and dusts him, and then goes on to win the doubles competition with Reed as well. So it's that level of, maybe they're so good that we get beyond appreciation, which is a scary place to be. And I think we've done this just a boatload of times regarding various athletes in various sports. But I think we're in danger of doing that with Alfie and Didi, and we shouldn't, because it is exceptional every time they get out there. I'm curious, Simon, if you know the answer to this, because I do not. But I'm looking at these draws littered with Japanese players. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if there's an intentional aspect to that, if our listeners know, if perhaps this is off the back of the Paralympic Games in Tokyo for the 2020 Summer Olympics. But there's Japanese players all over the place. It's fascinating.
What a question to throw to me, because I have no idea, but I'm absolutely fascinated to find out, because there's something inherently utterly transfixing about that idea, isn't there? Of when you see so many players from a respective nation doing so well in a particular discipline, of like, what the fuck is driving this thing? Like, where's it coming from? Like, is there money involved in it that's not from that's not in different federations? Is this simply just a representation thing, which is that this country has just put more money into it, and therefore you're seeing more of these athletes? I do know one thing that I would take a stab at this one, and if we have any Japanese listeners, you can definitely write in and tell me that I'm completely speaking shit here. But they as a nation, I think, did make a concerted effort to recognize people with disabilities. I want to say about 20 years it got written into the constitution in Japan. Oh God. I'm verging into territory.
I like how you're like, I don't know much about this, but now you're going into legislation that they adopted. Like, I don't know why you put yourself this far out on the ledge now, where you're like, well, I'm not quite sure. But also in 1998, the upper chamber passed this law.
Yeah, but this also might be bullshit. I remember seeing this in a story a while ago, and because this is from there's a very famous anime and a very famous film that is in Japan called Jose the Tiger and the Fish, which is to do with a girl in a wheelchair, and it's like a very famous film that's been remade a ton of times, and each time it gets remade, it's sort of looking through the lens of how Japanese culture has evolved over the years in terms of its perspective on people with disabilities. So I'm going to say, let's park this conversation here and we can revisit it with someone who actually knows what they're talking about. Another guess, slightly educated guess, is Shingo Kaneda was absolute legend, still is an absolute legend in the sport. I think he has 21 major singles titles, 4 Paralympic gold medals, an all-time record in singles titles, 50 major titles overall, including doubles. I have a feeling that him being the GOAT and like being exceptional inspired a lot of kids as well in Japan to play, which is a guess, but I think that's pretty awesome as well. But yes, we will dig more into this. And like we said, if you do know the answer, let us know, because knowledge is power. Just to close this segment before we transition to another multiple time winner, Takedo Oda in this final here, who lost to Alfie Hewitt, 16 years of age.
Awesome.
Some good eating going down there in Japan in terms of this discipline. So yeah, let's finish this segment. There's only one thing left in the bag as we dip into it. Novak Djokovic won the men's singles title. 22 Grand Slams, 10 at the Australian Open. This final was the dampest of damp squibs.
So couple of things. I guess it was worth betting like 20 grand on this, right? At the beginning of the tournament, you wouldn't have won that much money, but it felt that safe because this was meant to be. And the hamstring stuff, I don't doubt it was real, but I think Novak found a place where he could comfortably slide into and not have to push himself beyond where he was comfortable. The forehand was a bit of a menace over the last 2 weeks. I think Goran Ivanisevic was even commenting like, the forehand, I haven't seen it that good since they've at least started working together, which is saying something for Novak. But the forehand was special. He might be the clutchest server ever, I feel like, at this point. Like, he doesn't really slip when he needs it ever, which is saying something. But I found it interesting that you kind of went right away to Steph Bush in the Discord about feeling like he's gonna get over the line soon. And I'm curious what you've seen differently from him to make you confident in that.
there was some real confidence this week, wasn't there? In terms of just his body language, the way that he was talking. And I think some of that can be chalked up to fake it till you make it idea. And maybe a lot of it as well is that he maybe has a lot of motivational speakers on his Twitter feed or his Instagram feed. And maybe it's what Patrick Mortagalo is feeding him as well. But I do think there's something to this, which is that those 60 odd wins that he had last year, they do help. They legitimately do help, because winning matches, there's no substitute for getting matches under your belt and repeatedly winning. And I genuinely believe going into this final that he thought he had a chance of winning. And that, I think, speaks volumes to where he is at mentally. And I think it speaks volumes to where he sees himself at the upper echelon of the sport. With all of that being said, Devang, what on earth is he thinking now after being utterly and thoroughly crushed?
Yeah. Well, I mean, how close is he? Like, is he farther, or is he closer than after that French Open final?
He was clearly closer on
He
play.
was a lot closer.
Much closer.
It's so weird to say this about a match that went with 2 tie breaks as well. But it never really felt out of reach for Novak.
It just never, at no point did I ever felt like he was under any pressure. And I thought the only thing that ever he looked like he was under pressure was when he was faking the injury. Oh, come on, people.
You had to get it in there, folks.
Exactly.
You had to get it in there. We'll talk about the other stuff with his pops, who I've said this before on the show, but Novak having a dad who says way too much toxic garbage all the time makes him rude. Like, I'd cheer for him for this, because I'm like, all right, I get it. Your dad is wilding over there, and he just wants to win. The emotion he showed after winning, that said something. He said this was the most important, I think, title, or like it held the most meaning, which I have a hard time feeling this much vindication for him, once again, alluding back to the fact that it was his own doing that caused the problems. Last year, the Australian government covered themselves in grime as well. And I don't think they've done much better since then. So a lot of blame to go around, but I get it. I get why this meant so much to him, and he's back on level pegging with Rafa, and he's back to number 1 in the world. But holy cow, this tournament missed Carlos. This tournament missed some juice. I didn't feel like it had enough juice on the men's side at all. And I think maybe after the first week, I was allowing myself to believe that we were going to get some really good stuff towards the end. But I was hoping for more, and we really didn't get it.
This was the worst ATP tournament at a Grand Slam level I can remember in a long time. It was extremely dull. There was a couple of nice matches and a couple of interesting and fun matches that sort of alluded to some future potential of what we can see from certain players. But I left this one thinking this was a complete and utter stinker.
Do you have a best match candidate on the men's side?
Is it fair to say Murray Kokonakis? But
honestly, yeah. Yeah, or Berrettini, which happened in rounds 1 and 2.
But here's the thing about that match as well, though. That was more just attrition, like in the sense of just like, is one of these players going to die on court? That's kind of what the level of interest that was in this. And I have spoken at length on this podcast about, like, I'm just not that interested in the marathon stuff. Like, you know, these warrior players that are on the court, look at them do it for 5.5 hours. Like, no, I'm here for quality, not for length of time. And this one felt by the back end of it that it was like, can we just get it? And this came up during the course of the week, didn't it? Who was it that was saying it? You'll know this. You spend more time online than I do. It was Caitlin Thompson, right? It was Caitlin Thompson who was talking about it. Basically saying that people remember the 5th set, but they don't ever remember the trash that is the 4th and the 3rd set to get to the 5th set. And I think that's universally true across the board, is that this one was not very good in those sets either.
Thoughts on Novak wearing the jacket with 22 on it? I mean, if he didn't think he was going to win, we've lost the plot here. But I'm glad everyone was like, we all understand he's going to win this. So they made the jacket.
Jesus Christ. The dude has learned absolutely nothing. Has zero humility.
He learned from Roger. In this sense, though. Like, I wish he had a jacket with 21 on it too, in case he lost. That would have been hilarious. And he wore it in the trophy celebration.
One shout out, I guess, on the men's side before we transition into parting shots. Shout out to Sepp Korda, because I know he pulled out of his match in the quarterfinals against Karen Khachanov, but beating Daniel Medvedev the way that he did, beating Hubie Hurkacz in the way that he did in an absolute marathon 5-setter, positive signs for Seb Korda moving forward. I think he's going to have a really good season.
I'm still reading way too much into that match against Novak a few weeks ago when he had some match points. I'm like, you know what? He's not far. It's not far
hair,
away.
Dude. It's the hair.
It's the hair.
I
mean, the genes, his sisters are insane athletes as well. So I feel like they got something going. All right. That is our Australian Open roundup. When we come back to wrap up the show, it's parting shots. Welcome back to the Open Era podcast. It's that time again, parting shots, where we go through the things that we wanted to cover that don't necessarily fit inside the box that is ATP and WTA tennis. Simon, let's go.
Alrighty. It also happened during the course of this week is that allegedly, let's go with allegedly. I mean, there's no allegedly. Novak Djokovic's father was seen with a group of Russian supporters. There's some elements to this which is still up for debate of what he said, but it certainly looked like that this person was taking photos with, if not complete white supremacists, but certainly Russian nationalists and certainly pro-Vladimir Putin supporters. When I saw this story and I saw it unfold the way it did, my first thought in my brain was literally like the Michael Scott gif of him just going like teeth drying, like, no, oh God. Oh no, this is not a good look at all. This is not good in any stretch of the imagination. What did you think?
I'm going to try and be charitable here and say that a lot of people approach Novak's dad when he's walking around the grounds asking for photos, just basically like running up beside him and being like, hey, sure, Don, like, we love your son. He's our idol. Can we get a photo? I imagine that happens a lot. I also imagine that he loves that and he's very proud of his son and loves the fact that people are coming up to him and asking for photos and wanting to revel in just being a Novak supporter. So I think I could see a situation where some fans came up to him or it was like a quick situation. I think someone used the word ambushed. Like that's how this photo op happened. But I choose to believe that him banning himself from the semifinals was an acknowledgement that he wasn't careful enough. He wasn't respectful enough of the things happening around him. And that's why this happened. And they are still a bit shook by everything that happened last year and felt worried about it as opposed to defiant, which I think is positive.
I wonder what the reason is behind them wanting to control the PR image. That's the thing that I'm always curious about, is because I think Novak Djokovic desperately wants to be liked, like desperately wants to be loved. And I get the sense also that his father does. I think in this case, I was told many years ago by someone that I have a huge amount of respect for, don't chalk anything up to malice, which is more than likely incompetence or ignorance.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's basically where I end up here.
I think Novak's dad wants people to like Novak more than Novak wants people to like Novak because he's his dad. He's his dad. And like, that's the whole thing, right? Like, I think that's the elephant in the room here. And yeah, I totally agree with you. And I guess the issue is Tennis Australia. And Tennis Australia really just not doing a good job throughout the last couple of weeks, right? So that's probably who should be answering to this stuff. Cough, Craig Tiley, cough.
Last year, we were debating whether or not we were going to put in our application for co-presidents of the PTPA. This year, we are putting our candidacy forward for President of Tennis Australia. I think we can do it, Dev.
It's time.
Let's transition to some comments that caught the eye of a couple of people. And I think this one actually made the front page of the BBC, which is interesting to see some of the carryover story that happened here, which is Victoria Azarenka was very upset with some of the reporters, accusing the press in general of generating clicks in regards to both Novak Djokovic and just across the board in terms of trying to use that word ambush for Novak Djokovic's father. I think that's kind of the sense that I was getting with Azarenka as well, which is that there was a level of hostility from the press towards some of the tennis players and trying to put them in boxes and trying to get them to say certain things. To which all of this I say, yep. And that's what the press has been doing for decades at this point. It's not particularly nice. I'm kind of glad that she said it, but it kind of all was a bit of a non-story to me in the end, Deb.
Yeah. I like Victoria Azarenka a lot. I loved her run here. Once again, I think it means something when so many players get on with you, or like it says something about you as a person, and it clearly that's the case with Victoria Azarenka in the sense that a lot of her fellow peers have a lot of respect for her. And I think that matters. There's something about the quote though, at the end, I think towards where she says, quote, "I don't know what you want us to do about it, like talk about it. I don't know what's the goal here." And it's continuously brought up these incidents that in my opinion have nothing to do with players, but somehow you keep dragging the players into it. What's the goal here? I think the goal is to remind people this shit is still happening. Probably. That's probably the goal, right? Like the goal is to say, just because we are no longer talking about this every day, it's still happening. That to me is the goal. A reminder, reminding people, whether you like it or not, that this is still happening. So I found that answer a bit wanting for me.
Agreed. Wimbledon banned Russians and Belarusians. The war carried on. Aryna Sabalenka won this tournament. The war will carry on. Ultimately, there are small steps that everyone can do, but the big stuff, like everything else, is much, much outside the scope of what an individual can do. And I think that's kind of where we were coming to from our perspective on the Wimbledon stuff as well, which is this only breeds discrimination, this only breeds hatred at an individual and a community level. But there's still a war going on. There's still a war going on, and we still have a duty to talk about that, is that a sovereign country was invaded by a next-door neighbor in a move that was not only illegal, they have committed war crimes repeatedly over and over and over and over again, and people are still dying every single day.
Yeah, and I don't know how comforting it is for Alexander Dolgopolov to hear that it wasn't intentional or no one has any malice or it was all an accident. I don't know. I don't think that matters to him. I think what matters is that life is continuing on without basically a second to pause at this point. And his countrymen and his people are still going through utter hell. And I think he wants some answers, and I understand why. Which
is kind of why, despite some of the things that Maida Kostyuk has said, I still admire her ability to keep putting this stuff into the news and keeping it front and center, because, like, put yourself in the same shoes. Let's say, Jesus, what is a part of Toronto? Etobicoke was invaded, Dev.
Wow. Yeah. By the Ford family? Because it was.
Indeed so. Maybe this metaphor is not particularly
No,
useful.
it was good. I shouldn't have thrown it away. But yeah, exactly. I wouldn't stop talking about it. I'd be talking about it daily. If my life had somehow been able to carry on, my job, everything else, I was somehow able to do this still. You better believe I'd be like, hey guys, there's people in Etobicoke still.
Ah, dear. I don't really know how to finish this segment up other than just to say, like, Novak Djokovic's dad just seems like a fucking idiot. I think that's the...
Yeah, I get, like that's sometimes that's it. His dad's a bit of a goof, a buffoon.
But that's the problem, right? I said that was going to be the final point on it. But, like, buffoonish behavior and stupidity actually does fucking hurt people. In the case of Novak last year as well, right? Like, the dude has still not learned his damn lesson over this. And it doesn't matter.
He won, right? That's the thing. He won. And, like, the way this is being championed as an FU to vaccine restrictions, like, all the worst people in the world are making that point, right? Like, I don't think the sane or the sensible are saying this is why Novak has won, or like this is why it means extra. That's not the thing. But I think the worst people in the world are using that. And I think the worst people in the world are using Novak's dad posing with this flag as another notch in their belt. And it goes to what you're saying, that no matter the intention, it has impact. I guess I'm kind of sick of waiting for these people to acknowledge that, because it's not going to happen. It's not.
Indeed so. Let's transition to an article which was written by Jonathan Jarutko of the BBC Sport during the course of the week. He was quoting some of the changes which could be made. Andy Murray was quoted during the course of the week saying, how can some of these late night matches and how can some of the scheduling be changed in favour of the players, and indeed to make it so that we're not finishing at 5 a.m. This was kind of a technical answer, but I think I could dive into what Murray was trying to say, but here's an idea that's not ridiculous. Don't play until 2 a.m. Like, just don't do that. Like, just set a curfew and stop. Like, that's also an option. You could just do that.
Yeah, and in this article, they mention who it's not beneficial for: umpires, officials, fans, ball kids, players, literally everyone associated with the tournament on a ground level. But you know who probably is pushing back on this? TV people, Simon. I don't think you could. Can you schedule one match in the night session for your TV overlords?
Let me ask you this question, though. Which TV people? Because ESPN certainly didn't give a shit this tournament, did they?
Yeah. And I think that's a great point. I think so. For more in the sense I was thinking about, like Wimbledon and the US Open and the French Open to a lesser extent. And Australia falls in that weird place where everything is going to be terrible time-wise because it's in Australia. But I do think this is about TV and streaming. This is why it'll be hard to change this, even though everyone and their mother agrees that was really dumb.
Yep, agreed. Let's transition to another story which got a little bit of... Nah, let's be more fair to this. It didn't get any triples. I just thought it was interesting. Rod Laver gave an interview to the New York Times during the course of this week. And it's not actually that often that you get to read some of the thoughts of Rod Laver, because you only see him as this old man sitting in the box, or someone who makes Roger Federer cry when presenting a trophy to him. I just encourage everyone to read this, just to get a sense of who he is as a person. And it's a sort of gentle reminder that the man has a little bit of an ego, shall we say? Just perhaps a slight bit of an ego in the way that some of the answers to these questions. And I think it's a good one to sort of circle and take a look at, because he's a fun person to listen to.
I love Rocket Rod at 84 is still like, if I could use some of the rackets they're using now, I would bounce some of these guys. Which, God, I would love to. Forget that weird McEnroe AI thing they did last year. Somehow make it so that Rod Laver can play Novak in the same conditions. Come on. No, I fully agree. The interview was great. And I also found it fascinating how hard Rod had to work to make people care about tennis in the early days. One of those stories that I had an idea about or had a general sense of, but it's fascinating to hear him tell it. But I highly recommend checking it out as well.
We'll wrap up quickly. I know we're at the end of the episode and we're running short on time, but let's just do a few quick fire ones. Really did enjoy Francis Tiafoe's outfit this week. More of this, please. And also normalize men getting interesting color patterns and interesting styles across the board, because that's nice to see.
I gotta shout out Lacoste. Novak gets the best gear of any of the top men's player by 80 miles. It's not close.
We will agree to disagree on that point as we
wow.
head to
Right.
the next story. Jelena Dokic, took to Instagram during the course of this week to share some of the horrendous material that had been directed towards her. A tremendous amount of body shaming, of fat shaming that she'd received during the course of the week. It's not great to look at. It's not great to read. It's a reminder that some poor woman who is just trying to be a professional on court has to deal with a bunch of shitbags who are trying to constantly harass and bully her. I just wanted to take this time to say, screw those people. And good job on Dokic trying to expose some of these, not only charlatans, but also pricks. Let's go with that.
Massive pricks who don't believe people are allowed to change and grow into themselves and live their best lives to their own standards and not some rando watching on TV. Yeah, utter pricks. I saw people making similar comments during Yelena Ostapenko's matches as well, which I found just a reminder of what utter goblins and ghouls walk among us.
Trash, certainly trash. And speaking of trash, potentially the ratings are trash for Breakpoint, Dev. I never got a chance to give you my review of it, and perhaps we'll save this for another episode because
you watched it all though. You watched it all.
I have seen all 5 episodes now. Yeah.
Give me a minute. Give me a minute on it.
Give you a minute, Jesus. Okay. I thought you were going to give me a sentence.
Was that too much? Was that too much or too little? Give me a sentence then. All right. I thought a minute was short, man. We've been talking for an hour plus.
My sentence review was like, it's all right. It's okay.
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, it's like, I saw that people were saying, actually, I think a friend of the show put this thread out. I can't find it right now, so I apologize. I'm blanking on the name. But they put out a thread saying like where it was ranked in like the various countries on Netflix, and it cracked the top 10 in a couple places, including Australia, but not to the level of Drive to Survive. But I think they were comparing it to DTS season 4, which maybe you compare it to season 1 for a true gauge. But I don't think it takes a media expert to say that this has not made the impact as Drive to Survive, not remotely close. Can it be effective though? And can it maybe end on a high note with those last 5 episodes? For sure. But tennis is it's way, 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 way different from F1 in a few key ways that I think they weren't able to crack in this series.
Yeah, but Dev, is Nick Kyrgios a bad boy? When will we ever figure this stuff out? Jesus. Final 3 stories. Riley Opelka. What's happened here, Dev?
I think he deleted his Twitter. I think he stopped tweeting after seeing him kind of get out there on Twitter and send his tweets out there, and people were like, "Oh, okay, great." Someone on his management team successfully convinced him to stop tweeting, which we should all follow those wise words. But I thought that was interesting because I think I netted out at appreciating 20% of what Riley Opelka tweeted out. Or I'm like, okay, yeah. The other 80%, I'm like, I wish I didn't see this, but at least he was saying something, you know? And I found it interesting coinciding with this. Taylor Fritz is tweeting a bit more. And Taylor Fritz was commenting on the Novak injury stuff, which I found pretty insightful. So I'm sad to see Riley go, even though there is some Galaxy Brain stuff in there. Those conversations that are being conducted between team players and their teams, more of that on Netflix, eh? Let's see.
Absolutely. Speaking of Breakpoint and speaking of interesting conversations, an AMA happened during the course of this week where fans were allowed to ask one Casper Ruud questions. A user by the name of Veshnu asked the question, did you really scream "Ja" at him? Followed up by Ruud, sorry to disappoint, but no. Let's be honest, Casper Ruud definitely did this, right? After seeing Breakpoint.
He
100%.
Did you? Okay. He came off quite horribly in that Breakpoint show, right? Right?
His dad emasculated him. That's the thing that I found really like.
I love how he's talking about his intro to tennis and not bringing up that his dad was on the ATP. Like, I feel like that should have been a thing there. Nepo,
I scrapped so hard. Started from the bottom. Now we're here.
I'm looking at your dad's name on a Wikipedia draw from the 90s, bro.
Nepo baby. All over. Jesus. Let's close out this before we get to 2 challenges remaining. Ball Kid Gate. It kind of concluded. I mean, it literally concluded. The tournament is over. So the Ball Kids were seen mopping the court on their hands and their feet. Steph almost nailed a Ball Kid in the face.
He did.
Novak Djokovic entered into a very amusing conversation with the umpire about whether or not the Ball Kid was allowed to hand him a towel. One of the Ball Kids took Rafa Nadal's racket by accident against Jack Draper. And it also came out during the course of this week that there's not even a gender split equal in terms of girls and boys who were picked to be Ball Kids at the Australian Open.
More boys than girls.
Indeed so. Let me ask you a question just to frame this in a way that maybe people can understand. Do you think Craig Tiley would be remunerated with a gift bag?
No, I do not. I do not. And the amount of the ball kids who end up playing tennis and like making careers out of this stuff, like it's PTPA. Add this to the list, folks. And I know they get paid in other tournaments, but Tennis Australia, wow. Give your head a shake. The mopping the courts on the hands and knees, combined with the fact that they're still being made to handle these towels, which is just utterly disgusting on so many levels. It's awful. It's awful. If 98% of these kids were incoming, okay, so I should walk this back before I actually know the stats. But let's say if 70% of these kids were incoming from privileged backgrounds, I'd feel a lot worse. But I already feel bad, so it's bad.
There was, like, not to bury the entirety of this program, but like there's some indigenous stuff as well that I think they put in place a few years ago, which seems to have had some positive impacts in terms of this already.
70% was probably wrong. I think that's probably wrong.
I'm not sure about 70. 70's probably reasonable, dude.
We'll leave it there.
Pay these people. Pay these kids. I mean, that's like, there's no other way around this. Like, just make sure they are remunerated correctly, and also make sure that they are allowed to go home and don't have to work at 4 a.m. How about that? That seems like an easy way and an easy win here. This had such huge energy of when someone asks like a musician to perform at a bar or something. It's like, oh, no, like you're getting the exposure. That's what you're getting. You're not going to be paid, but we'll give you the exposure. Can you make this, do this graphic design for me? It's going to be really good in your portfolio. How about you just fucking pay these people?
Yeah, well said, sir.
2 challenges remaining. Dev, anything off the court that interested you during the course of the week?
Yeah, on a personal note, I decided to do dry January after a particularly hectic holiday season. A draining holiday season, though it was quite fun. But yeah, I've taken breaks from drinking alcohol, but this was around the same time that study in Canada came out where it's like, have a drop of alcohol and you're dead. And I was like, I wonder if this is directly pointed at me. But no, it's been a generally good month with ups and downs as per usual. But my relationship with alcohol, I think, has changed a lot just before this as well. But yeah, I know that to do this at this time of year, it gets pushed into the pile of getting back to the gym and like all these resolutions, etc. And like, what does it really mean? But I found it enjoyable and I'm glad I did it. So yeah, that was a brief glimpse into my life, Bush. As for you, you're coming home.
I am coming home. I'm coming home, as they say, as the song goes.
Yes.
I head back to Vancouver, I think, with a strange level of mixed emotions. Like, I've been away for a really, really long time. I've been away for almost 4 months now. And it actually made me feel like I miss the place. Like, I miss my home. Like, I miss sleeping in my own bed. So I'm excited to get back. I'm excited to do some regular stuff again. And I think it's a reminder that if you ever want to get a sense of how much you like the place that you live, go away from it for 4 months and see if you miss it and see if you want to get back.
See if you want to go back. That's a great test. Yeah. Man, 4 months flies by, Bush. I feel like it was yesterday. I was saying good luck out there and have fun, but
good luck out there, man. It's a brave world. It's a scary world.
Play hard, get in the corners, rise and grind, etc. Yeah. But no, as speaking as someone currently in Canada, we're very thankful to have you back.
It's kind of you, Dev. That's the show. We did it. Unbelievably, we got through another Australian Open.
Done. We did it. 2023 Australian Open in the books. Congrats to the winners, including Slamalenka. Number 1. First of many. Awesome to see.
First of many question mark, I guess.
Question mark. Some housekeeping. We are on patreon.com/open era. The Discord was absolutely wonderful these last couple of weeks and in general, but being in the time zone I was relying on our Discord to keep me abreast of what's happening as I was trying to get what little sleep I did. But love the folks over there. Join us on the Discord. You get the show ad free. You get it early on Sundays. Plus, you get to talk tennis all the time with our wonderful community. We're also on Twitter at Open Era Pod for however long Twitter remains up and running, which who knows. Again, finally, a rating or a review wherever you get this pod would be great as we try to get this show into more tennis fans' ears. Another reminder or housekeeping note, I was on Tennis and Bagels this week with a friend of the show, Owen Lewis, who was in Melbourne doing great coverage as usual, but I really enjoyed that chat. So if you want more of me talking to you about tennis, go to Tennis and Bagels, check out that show, check out that podcast. Those guys are great as well. Simon, anything else that I missed?
Wait, you're on Tennis and Bagels?
I was, man. I was.
I gotta give that a listen.
You should.
Love those guys.
You should. We do too. I love them too. All right. That is it for producer Greg on the ones and twos. And for Simon, thank you so much for listening to Open Era. We'll talk to you next week.